Hello, this is Vivica Williams, and you're watching Head to Head. As Britain prepares to leave the EU on the 29th of March this year, much uncertainty still hangs in the air. Prime Minister Theresa May now faces an uphill battle to bring together political parties with competing objectives to strike a compromise deal. And if that doesn't work, there are a range of other possible and maybe not so welcome outcomes. To talk more about this, we welcome to the studio today Jonathan Murphy, a UN parliamentary consultant. Hello, and thank you for being with us today, Jonathan.
Thanks, Vivica.
So Brexit's been playing out in a few years now, and it just seems to be getting worse rather than better. So catch us up on what's happened in the last just few weeks.
Well, I think the most important thing that happened in the last few weeks is that the deal that Theresa May, on behalf of the British government, reached with the EU, a deal for leaving the European Union and for starting to develop a new relationship between Britain and the EU, was very badly defeated in Parliament, defeat by more than 200 votes, which was the biggest defeat a government had ever suffered in the UK.
So, because it was kind of expected, I imagine, that she wouldn't win on this vote, or was there somewhat of an expectation that it might pass Parliament?
Well, originally the plan was to have it voted in December last year, but when it was clear that the government was going to be defeated, they pulled it and hoped that people would go away for their Christmas holidays and come back in a better frame of mind. But actually the situation got worse. There was even less support after the MPs had gone back to their constituents and talked with them. And so the vote ended up being defeated, as I said, by 230 votes. I think the problem that she has is that it was defeated by people from both sides. So a lot of her own backbenchers, who tend to be sort of British nationalists, are not terribly enthusiastic about too much cooperation with Europe, voted against it, the strong Brexiteers, and the people who are much more enthusiastic about Europe also voted against it. So she ends up being in this position in the middle, and not a middle position that's a consensus, but a middle position that no one is prepared to live with.
And that seems to often be the case when we come up with, quote, compromises. There's something that no one particularly likes, but you eventually agree on. What are some of the things that people aren't agreeing on in this plan? Because one of the major ones has always been this hard border with Ireland.
Yeah, the border with Ireland is a big issue, and that has been the issue that has been spoken about most. And the European Union even today has said that if Britain leaves without a transition deal, so this kind of no-deal Brexit, then they will impose frontier controls. And that's really quite a dangerous situation, because the end of the conflict with the IRA in Ireland was a result of what's called the Good Friday Agreement, right, which said that there would not be any kind of border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic, which is independent and part of the EU. So that's a problem that's very, very difficult to get over.
And even recently, speaking of that, there was a bomb in Ireland. Is that there was no connection, or is there speculation that there's the possibility of unrest or a lot of disagreement over this?
Well, I think there's no evidence yet of the reasons for that particular attack. There have always been these dissident Republican groups who have not been prepared to go along with the peace agreement, and from time to time they carry out attacks. I suppose it's a sign of the danger that things could get much worse. If a border is re-established between Northern Ireland and the Republic, that is a rallying point for extremists on the Republican side to say, look, Ireland is divided, we cannot accept that, and it gives an excuse to restart a military campaign.
Oh, so there's a lot more up in the air than what people think of when they talk about, we hear that a lot, the hard border, and people usually think it comes to the movement of goods. But Ireland has a long history of this division, and that's just would be a major disappointment, not more than a disappointment. When it comes to other parts of the plan, so what are some sticking points? As you said, there are people who want to completely leave, there are people who want to stay, and there are ones that it seems that everyone has a different idea of what Brexit means.
Well, I think you've put your finger on the issue, is that there aren't just two points of view. There's a whole series of different points of view, and different people are concerned, worried about different things. Some of the big issues, I think, are to do with freedom of movement. So the people who are in favour of a hard Brexit think that too many immigrants have come from Europe, particularly since the expansion of Europe to the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, Romania, Poland, Bulgaria, and so on. And several million people have come to Britain. And so the Brexit, the anti-hard border, the anti-EU people would like to see that immigration stopped. But then you have the other people on the other side, particularly quite a lot of young people, for whom the chance for them as British people to go and work in Europe, to travel freely in Europe without worrying about visas and how long they have to stay is super important.
Absolutely.
So you've got this completely different perspectives. And it's also, the country is very divided geographically as well. In the original referendum, big, wealthy cities, London in particular, voted enormously to stay in, whereas the poorer, more isolated parts of the country, who feel hard done by economically generally, tended to vote strongly for Brexit. So all kinds of different concerns, issues are mixed up, including perhaps lots of things that are not even related to Brexit, right. Just people's general dissatisfaction.
Absolutely. And this is something we see. I mean, even we were, I think, all aghast that such a monumental decision could be put down to a simple majority vote for something that will change the entire way that the UK is, to have just a simple majority vote. Because, as you said, we see this with populism or ideals of isolationism, protectionism. There's such a big difference between city and country, between people who are more affected by economic issues and traditional jobs. And so it doesn't seem that the issues that led to Brexit in the vote are as specific to the UK. But this outcome we're seeing is definitely something that's going to change it for generations. Now, this is a question I know everyone has on the mind, and of course you're not an expert or in the way of, you can't tell us what the future will be, but is there a possibility of a second referendum?
Oh, I think there's quite a high chance. It's probably around 50-50 now. We're going to see in the next few days, there's a series of votes coming up in Parliament where MPs have the chance to amend the legislation that is being proposed by the government, and several of the amendments that will be proposed will include going for a second referendum. I think what is most likely to happen in the short term is an extension of the deadline. Currently, Britain, if nothing else changes, Britain is going to leave on the 29th of March. I think it's becoming less and less likely that that's possible. Even if agreement was reached today, which is extremely unlikely, there's a huge amount of legislation that has to be passed, and I just don't think it's realistic that that will happen before 29th of March. The government doesn't want to say that they agree to an extension, because of course once you extend the date, then the question is, well, will Britain ever leave? And
right.
So I think the extension is almost certain in my view. Then whether there is some kind of a deal made during this extension period, which might go to the end of the year, or whether a second referendum throwing it back to the people, I think we're at probably 50-50 between those two possibilities.
I mean, I'd imagine most people are tired of Brexit in the UK. It's just this never ending. And is there a way to save face, and not just save face, but for a way, well, in general, to save face in this case, especially when it comes to Theresa May?
Oh, I think Theresa May is probably near the end of her political career. She's already said that she will not lead the Conservative Party into the next election. That was one of the ways that she was able to win her confidence vote. But I think the bigger issue in Britain is, how do you reduce the tensions that exist between people who feel very strongly on both sides. And I think it is, for me, one of the problems with referenda. You talked about that earlier. To take a super complicated issue that has hundreds of different aspects to it and say, are you for it or against it, is probably not the best way to make a decision. And that's why we've had representative democracy, where people can spend time, you elect MPs, they spend time looking at the issue, looking at all the different problems and all of the possibilities, and try and come up with something that people can live with. And I think actually one of the positive things I see about this Brexit process is that Parliament really has started to do that. So there is clearly not majority support either in Parliament or in the country for this kind of compromise that Theresa May came up with. And now parliamentarians are trying somehow to wrangle together and find some kind of consensus. And I think in some ways it's a demonstration that maybe Parliament's representative democracy is a better way to make very complicated decisions than just some kind of popularity contest in a poll.
Doesn't actually bode well. Popularity contests usually, as you say, they don't have all the facts. It's just this superficial kind of delivery of promises. Mm-hmm. And is there an option for something that's not either or? Mm-hmm. Because this has been the big issue, right? Leave or stay. Mm-hmm. Is there something in between where the UA can change its relationship with the EU? For example, we see other countries that are associate members that are in different stages of how they interact.
I think that's still quite a possibility. People talk about the Norway option, where Norway is like an associate member of the European Union. So they go along with most of the rules of the European Union. They contribute to the European Union budget. They don't have a say in the decisions of the European Union, but they have complete access to the market and free movement. The problem with that is for the people who in Britain who are very against free movement and want to stop immigration from the EU, the Norway model doesn't suit them at all, because there would still be completely free movement from all the EU countries to Britain. I think it's still quite a high possibility that some kind of deal like that, which is what is called a soft Brexit or a very soft Brexit, may well be an outcome, yeah.
Okay, well, then we're going to have to see how this comes out. There's definitely a lot of time for antics and deals, and we'll definitely have you back on to give us the latest updates.
It'll be a pleasure. Thanks very much, Vivica.
Thank you, Jonathan. And that was Jonathan Murphy, a UN parliamentary consultant. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned with UATV for more.